Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 4, the midpoint of our MBA607A International Business course. David Brewer here with this week's Brewers Bullets, reviewing things that we've been talking about, that we're looking at this week, and then a look ahead at the course. So let's get to it. The 3 things we need to be paying attention to. Number 1, for this past week, have really enjoyed the dialogue forums this week as we're talking about barriers to people rising up and generating self-sufficient income. I think we're all sort of on the same page about that now, that the goal is not simply to provide everybody with a level of income, but to provide people with opportunity to generate their own income. It's a dignity-producing thing in addition to a finance-producing thing. It enables people to enter into life and community, and that's really what we're looking for, not just giving money to people. So, some pretty interesting questions, some really interesting dialogue this week that I appreciated. I want to call out 2 specific things. One is I want to encourage you to continue pushing each other. Each time you post a response to another classmate, or if a classmate asks you something, I encourage you to ask a question, a follow-up question, not just what do you think, but something specific. What does this look like in your context? You work in healthcare or you work in the automotive industry. What does this look like in your context? How do you think you, as a frontline or a middle manager or a senior executive, how can you impact these kinds of things? This is the part of the course where we're really getting into the development side, the justice side. This week is sort of the hinge point, and for the rest of the course, a lot of it will be much broader, sort of conceptual stuff. So I encourage you each week to continue asking questions of each other to probe more deeply. The second thing I noticed this week is that there's a very heavy emphasis in the Poverty Cure video series, of course, on international work, especially in developing countries or poorer areas of developed countries. And I asked this question a couple of times on discussion boards, and I noticed that a couple of you picked up on that and started asking the questions of each other. What about the U.S.? Some of you may end up working overseas for an international or multinational corporation. Others of you may end up working in the U.S. or already work in the U.S. for an international business. Some of you may always work for local, community or regional, state or tri-state area or something like that type businesses. So does that mean the stuff you're watching in the Poverty Cure? Does that mean the articles that you're reading? Does that mean Hofstede's insights? Does that mean all that stuff is just interesting stuff for a class but doesn't really have any relevance? No, I encourage you to think about, what does that look like here? For example, it would be a really interesting comparison to watch the Poverty Cure videos in talking about Kenya or Vietnam or Cambodia or Argentina, etc., and then to stop and think, or maybe even do a little research on, how did redlining affect the United States? What is the financial setup of people of color, of African Americans, for example, due to government policy preventing, in large measure, preventing African Americans from owning property, or at the very least owning it in desirable neighborhoods, which would appreciate, right? The whole concept of white flight. Redlining, an official government policy recommended toward realtors to intentionally place African Americans at a financial disadvantage. These kind of situations, that's just one example. These kind of situations do not just happen in poor, corrupt countries overseas. We need to look in the mirror, too, and see what has happened in our own country. What is now happening in our own country, in our own companies, that prohibit or inhibit people from rising up? There are strategic, systemic disadvantages in some locations, rural areas. Appalachia gets a lot of press for something like this. The urban core, which in a lot of cities was hollowed out for decades. Now there's sort of this revitalization, lots of people moving back into the inner core and making loft apartments out of warehouses, or revitalizing canal areas, or things like that. So you can see that these issues are present in our own companies, our own communities, our own country. Let's not lose sight of that as we continue to talk about international business. Every international business has a home. It may have multiple homes, multiple headquarters, etc. But it all comes from somewhere, and that impacts how the owners or the leaders of that business approach the business that they're doing. Let's keep thinking. So that's last week. This week, week 2, bullet number 2, this week is all about your presentation and your presentation handout. So the topic that you chose and were approved for in week 1, this is the week to finish all of that work. 18 to 22 slides, about 20 minutes, a voiceover PowerPoint presentation. If you're having any problem with the technology, there are instructions in the syllabus, a couple of videos you can watch, but you could also contact me if you need to. Text me or email me. I'll get back to you pretty quickly. And then a handout. And notice that the handout is 2 things. I want to make one comment about the presentation, one about the handout. Notice that the handout includes a summary of your research, which should be very short, couple hundred words tops, 1 page. The second page of your handout should be as though you were presenting this research, the information you've gathered, as though you're presenting this at a conference. There should be a photo, a professional photo, so not you hanging with your dog on the beach somewhere. There should be a professional photo, looking decent, headshot, ideally, etc. And then an autobiography of yourself. Again, not emphasizing all the personal side and the hobbies. Imagine that you are presenting at a conference where professional people have paid money to come hear the research you're doing. That's the kind of biography that you want to include for yourself. This should include, this is what I'll be looking for. This should include not only who you are, your current job, etc. It should include why I should listen to you speak about this topic. There are things in your experience, even if you chose something that you think, I've never done anything with tariffs, there are things in your experience that link up to the topic that you have. Find those and call those out in your biography. Give me a reason to listen to you on this presentation. With the presentation itself, please treat it like a real presentation. It's a voiceover PowerPoint. There aren't people sitting here watching you, ready to applaud or throw tomatoes or anything like that, but treat it like a real presentation. The reason for this assignment, there are 2 main reasons for this assignment. One reason is that you do a deep dive on research into one specific subject area related to international business. The second is you get an opportunity to present as though you're doing a real presentation where all your classmates and your instructor, so 17 of us, are going to be watching that presentation, listening to that presentation, processing it, and we're going to give you feedback. We're going to give you feedback not just on the content, but also on the presentation itself. Did you speak too fast or too slow? Too loud or too quiet? Was all of your information on your slides? So pay attention to the presentation as well. For my own sake, if nothing else, keep this in mind. Each of you in week 5 will listen to 2 or 3 of these presentations, of your classmates' presentations, and write about them. I will listen to every one of these presentations. 20 minutes, 16 students. I'm listening to more than 5 hours of presentation. Please do not make it boring. Please do not make it boring. I don't need bells and whistles, but I do need good, solid content presented well. All right? So that's this week. No dialogue forum to talk about. What you'll do is you'll post your presentation and your handout in the dialogue forum so that people can read those in preparation for week 5. Third bullet, looking ahead. Week 5 will be writing papers, processing all the information that you got from your classmates' presentations. Like I said before, this week right now is the hinge point. Before, we've been doing a lot on development, aid versus trade, justice, things like that. Now we get into broad issues. What do tariffs look like? How does direct investment work? How does exchange rates? How are all these sort of broad international business topics, which are applicable to small and large international businesses, how are those happening? So moving forward, let's keep in mind justice and development and trade not aid and barriers to entry, etc., as we look at these larger, broader issues in international business. So that's kind of where we're headed. Those are our 3 bullets, Brewers bullets for this week. I look forward to seeing you online, watching your presentations, and reading your handouts. Questions this week, anytime, text me 503-422-1736 or email me at my Spring Arbor address. Quick note, I am hosting a conference in Indianapolis this week, so my response time may be a little slower than it has been in terms of email or text, but I will get back to you within 24 hours and we can proceed from there to make sure you have the help you need to get what you need done. Thanks so much. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.